Good morning. It's good to see you all here. It's time for us to begin our Bible class. We are in the book of Revelation, chapter 13. We've been studying through the book of Revelation, and as we get into this part of the book, just to kind of remind us of where it is that we've been, the book of Revelation it talks about the same time period, but it looks at it from two different aspects, and so sometimes people get confused over what's going on in the book because they assume that this is things that are happening sort of in succession or in order. But he's looking at the same time period, but from two different lenses. From chapter 4 through chapter 11, we have the persecution of the Christians by the Roman Empire that's going to take place because the word of God is going out, and because those first century disciples are spreading the news and they're evangelistic and they're spreading the gospel. The persecution's going to come from the Roman Empire, and because of that persecution, God's going to bring some calamities upon them. We see that with the announcements that are made with the opening of the seven seals. We see that with the trumpets being blown and one third of things being touched, or one third of things being destroyed, that there are natural calamities upon the sea and upon the land and upon the drinking water. And there are calamities with regards to their sin problem, those locusts that come up out of that bottomless pit that have just a hideous look to themselves. That represents the ugliness of sin and the moral decay of the Roman Empire that's going to be an issue for them. And then the sixth trumpet blows, and you've got foreign invasions that take place. And so, as we look at chapters 4 through 11, it's really dealing with what's going on with the persecution of the saints and then God's retribution upon the Roman Empire and warnings of his retribution upon the Roman Empire. And it focuses on things that are taking place on earth. Once we get to chapter 12, we get a peek behind the curtain. And while these things are taking place on earth, while these physical battles are going to take place on earth, there's a spiritual battle that's going on behind the scenes. And so we get a peek behind the curtain. We don't often get to see that in Scripture, and we don't get to see that in our world. We see the physical things that take place in our world, but we don't see the spiritual battle a lot of times that's taking place behind the scenes. Or Elisha had a servant that was concerned because they were surrounded, and the foreign army had them surrounded, and he was concerned that they were going to be wiped out. And Elisha prayed that the eyes of his servant would be open and he'd be able to see what's really going on. And he sees all these chariots of fire that are around that earthly army, so he gets the chance to see that spiritual battle that's taking place behind the scenes. And if you remember at that time, what Elisha said to his servant: those who are with us are more powerful than those that are with them, so they're going to be victorious. And so you sort of have the same thing going on here in the book of Revelation, where you get this peek behind the curtain, because those that are with us, were with those first century Christians, are more powerful than those who are with uh, Satan, right? Those who are with the Roman Empire. And so we're going to be victorious in the end. And so the book of Revelation is greatly a book of victory, that they need to stick with it. They need to stick with Christianity. They need to stick with Christ, that even though things may be bad and they may be facing persecution, that things are going to get better. There's going to be a victory at the end of all of this. And so we're told about the war that exists between God and Satan, between light and darkness, between good and evil. That age-old battle we're told about, and given sort of an overview of that in chapter 12. That Satan's making war. He's trying to stop the Messiah from coming. He's trying to wipe out the bloodline, if you will, trying to wipe him out as soon as he's born. You think about Herod killing all those children that were age 2 and younger. That Satan's really trying to stop this, and he thinks he's got it won, right? When Jesus is crucified on the cross and comes to find out that he didn't really win. And so, since he can't get after Christ, and he's going to go after the church. And we see that in Revelation chapter 12. The church is represented there as the woman at the end. The woman represents God's people there in Revelation chapter 12. At the beginning of chapter 12 is talking about Judaism and the Jews being God's people in times of old. But the woman at the end is not talking about Mary. It's talking about the church itself, that those are God's people. And so when you get to the end of Revelation 12, Satan's not been effective. He's not been successful in going after God and going after Christ and going after Jesus, making war in heaven. None of that has worked out for him. So now he's going to persecute the church. And he's going to persecute the church as a whole here in the first century. But when that doesn't work, he's going to come after us as individual Christians. Notice that at the end of chapter 12 and verse 17. The dragon was enraged with the woman. He went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And so when he's not successful in all of these things, he's going to come after you and me. He's going to come after individual Christians. And so this is just an overview of the spiritual battle. Now, Jesus is going to spend a lot of time showing John these signs. The angels are going to spend a lot of time showing John these signs as to what's going to happen with Satan going after the church as a whole. And that's what you have in context here, beginning in chapter 13, is that Satan's going to recruit three allies. You're going to have the sea beast, we talked about a couple weeks ago. You're going to have the earth beast that we'll hopefully get to today. And you're going to have the harlot. He's going to recruit three allies to go after Christians with him. And so we'll see those three allies rising up here in chapters 13 and following. And then we'll see those three allies going down in chapters 17, 18, and 19. And once those three allies go down, well, then Satan's the one who's left, and the book will deal with what happens to Satan in Revelation chapter 20. But that's where we are in the context of all of this. That's what's going on here. And so a couple weeks ago, we looked at the beast that came out of the sea. Notice we're in Revelation chapter 13 this morning. Notice it says there in verse 1, I stood on the sand of the sea and saw a beast rising up from the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 10 crowns, 10 horns and horns, 10 crowns on his heads, a blasphemous name. And so he sees this beast that comes up out of the sea, and we looked at this beast as sort of a composite, right? It's got a little bit of a lion in it, it's got a little bit of a bear in it, it's got a little bit of a leopard in it, and it's got terrible teeth. And when you think about the Roman Empire going back, we looked at Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 2, 2 weeks ago when we were dealing with this. And we noticed that in the visions that were given to Nebuchadnezzar in his dream and the vision that was given to Daniel in Daniel chapter 7, that this is a representation, again, it mentions the sea, right, that these things come out of the sea. This is governmental power that's being talked about here. That you've got these different beasts that are going to come along representing different kingdoms. And that's not me saying that they represent different kingdoms. We saw that in Daniel chapter 7. And if you read through Daniel chapter 7, you'll see that it's explained to Daniel that these beasts are in representation of 4 successive kingdoms that are going to come. There's Babylon, which is represented as a lion. And it said that his wings were plucked off and he was given feet like a man and stood on 2 feet. And so that lion, that first kingdom, is in reference to Babylon. And then there's a second kingdom that's going to come, and it's a bear, and he's raised up on one side, and that's the Medes and the Persians. Well, it's raised up on one side because the Persians were stronger than the Medes. It eventually became the Persian Empire. There's a third beast that's a leopard that has 4 wings on its back, and it has 4 heads, and it's representational of the Greek Empire, that when Alexander the Great conquered, he conquered swiftly. That's the idea of leopard being a fast animal already and then having 4 wings on his back, that he's going to move very quickly. But when he dies, when Alexander dies, his kingdom is broken up into 4 pieces. And so that it's got 4 heads. And if you read on, there's another vision that he has about a ram that's defeated by a goat that has a singular horn. And when that horn is broken off, when that first ruler dies, it's broken up into 4 kingdoms. And so all that is explained in Daniel's prophecies. And so when this is written to these folks here in apocalyptic language, this book of Revelation is written to these first century Christians, he's borrowing from those Old Testament images. Right? He's not having some sort of image of this particular beast that, well, it looks like a lion's head and it's got bear paws and it's got the body of a leopard, that is just a weird looking creature. No, what he's talking about is it's going to have parts of the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, because the Romans are going to borrow from all of those things when they take over that same territory. They're going to borrow greatly from that. And so they're going to sort of be a composite of those 3 previous empires. And so the beast that is here, that is seen, that represents the civil governmental power of the Roman Empire, that's what he's talking about. That's the picture that we get from that. That's the idea that we get from that particular beast rising up out of the sea. Notice he's given power, he's given authority. It says in verse 5, he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. He's given authority to continue for 42 months. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. When Domitian comes along, and he's really the one that they've got to be concerned about, because when Domitian comes along as emperor, They may have faced some persecution under Nero, and they may have faced some limited persecution in different regions of the Roman Empire. But when Domitian comes along, it's going to be persecution on steroids, because Domitian's going to demand that he be worshipped as a god. And so you talk about speaking blasphemy or speaking against God, it certainly fits. He's given a mouth and he speaks great things, and talks about how great he is and that he needs to be worshipped. It says, those who dwell on the earth will worship him whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. And so those that dwell on the earth, those that are earth dwellers, those that are worldly people, well, they're going to go along with that because they don't want to have the hassle. Christians aren't going to do that, though, because they can't say Caesar is Lord. They can't burn incense to him as if he's a god. They can't just add him to their list of gods like all other people in pagan religions could do. Because Christians believe in how many gods? One, right? And so they're not going to bow a knee to somebody else, bend a knee to somebody else. They're not going to bow down to somebody else. They're not going to proclaim that somebody else is Lord. So there's going to be a problem here with the Christians. But those that are not found written in the book of life, you can't compromise, right? You can't compromise and say, well, we're just going to go along to get along. So we're going to burn a little incense. We're just going to say Caesar is Lord, but we don't mean it. Because if you do that, your name's not going to be written in the book of life. And you want your name to be there, right? You want your name to be there. Any comments or questions on any of these things as we get back into where we were 2 weeks ago? So he says there in verse 9, he who has an ear to hear, let him hear. That means this is serious business. You need to pay attention to what it is that he's saying. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. They need to realize that even though they may be taken away captive, even though they may be imprisoned, even though they may be persecuted by the Roman Empire, he who kills with the sword is going to die by the sword. So God doesn't call Christians in the first century to rise up in arms and overthrow the Roman Empire, does he? What does he say to do? Endure, right? Endure it. Take it. Because those that are killing by the sword, they're going to die by the sword. And the Roman Empire that's persecuting them, what's going to happen to them? They're going to be defeated. They're going to be overcome. They're going to be overthrown. But the Christians aren't going to have to be the ones to rise up with weapons and go out on the battlefield in order to defeat them and overthrow them. God's going to take care of that. So we get the picture then of the second beast, beginning here in verse 11. It says, I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he is granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. So we see this second beast. He's coming up, and he comes up out of the earth. So the first beast comes up out of the sea, out of the political sea, if you will. This beast comes up from the earth, also talking about something that is human, right? That comes up from the earth. So it has an earthly origin, comes up from the earth. So its origin is also human. It says that he has two horns. Now the sea beast, right? He had 10 horns, and we'll get into that more when we get down into chapter 17. But we've already talked about that a little bit in our past lessons. And for those of you that are here and you're just getting a snippet of this, if you want to get the context of where we are, all of these lessons are available on YouTube. If you want to go back and look at any of this, or look back at the introductory material, especially. But he has two horns like a lamb, right? And so he's got some authority, if you will, and some power, if you will, that's been given to him. But he's only got two horns, and it says that he looks like a lamb, but when he speaks, he sounds like a dragon. So here's someone who looks like they're religious. Here's someone who looks like they're spiritual. Here's someone who looks like they're wholesome, has two horns, looks like a lamb, right? And we've seen that lamb being referred to as Jesus earlier in chapter 5, right? The lamb that had been slain that is there, that is representational of Jesus. And so he looks legitimate, if you will, just when you look at him. But when he speaks, his words betray him, right? When he speaks like a dragon. Well, who's the dragon in chapter 12? Say it a little louder. The devil, right? The devil or Satan. So even though he looks like a lamb, when he speaks like the devil, right? And so his speech, if you will, gives him away. And so he's a servant, but he's a servant of the sea beast. He's going to exercise the power that's the sea beast gives him. So even though he looks like a lamb, he speaks like a dragon. He sounds like Satan. And come over and look at Matthew chapter 7 for just a moment. You might say, well, why is he given authority to do this? Why is he given power to do this? Why is he given the ability to do this? Why would God allow this to take place? We might wonder. Notice in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 15, that Jesus says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. So Jesus issued a warning way back in the Sermon on the Mount where he said, you got to be careful of false prophets. There are going to be false prophets. There are going to be folks that wearing sheep's clothing, right? They're going to look like a lamb. They're going to look like they're legitimate. But when they speak, their speech is going to betray them. Inwardly, they are ravenous wolves, right? And when this lamb, this earth beast, when he speaks like a dragon. For those of you that just came in, we're in Revelation 13. So it looks like it's got some respectability, right? Religion, but when he opens his mouth, he's clearly not respectable. And so this beast that comes up from the earth, he's going to be referred to here in the book of Revelation as a false prophet. Skip over to chapter 13 or 16, I'm sorry, verse 13. In Revelation chapter 16 and verse 13, says, I saw three unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. And so you've got three of them. The three of them are mentioned here, right? You've got Satan, you've got the sea beast, and then you got the beast of the earth, who's referred to there as the false prophet. Come over to Revelation chapter 19 and verse 20. Says, then the beast, the sea beast, was captured, and with him the false prophet, who worked signs in his presence by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. So they're not going to have a good end. We already, sometimes you don't want to read the end of the book because then you'll know how it ends. But we know how it's going to end for them, right? It's not going to end well for them. They're going to be thrown into the lake of fire. Look over at Revelation chapter 20 and verse 10. Is talking about what's going to happen to Satan. It says, the devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And so that's getting us towards the end of time, when judgment day is going to take place and Satan's going to be thrown into hell, and the false the sea beast is going to be there, and the false prophet is going to be there. And so this earth beast is referred to, he's called a false prophet here throughout the book of Revelation. And are there folks today, now that this is talking about what's going to take place here under the Roman Empire, but we need to make application of this in our own particular day and age. We need to be careful of what we're listening to, or who we're listening to, or what we're paying attention to, don't we? Because are there false prophets that are out there today? There's still false prophets there. And whose bidding are they really doing? And why is that dangerous? Is it not good that, well, at least sometimes we say, well, at least while they're not coming to the church, at least people are going somewhere, right? At least they're recognizing that there is a God. Is that a good thing? It gives them a false sense of security. Yes, ma'am.
Satan deterred Eve with one word. That's all it takes. Satan doesn't need you to be a demonic worshiper. Satan just needs you to walk away from the true God. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. She said, if you didn't hear her, she said that Satan deceived Eve with one word, right? You shall not surely die. One word. So he didn't have to get her to worship him. He didn't have to get her to practice demonic worship. It's just one word. If we stray away from the truth, right, we're not doing God's bidding anymore. We're really doing Satan's bidding. And because of false religion, because of that false sense of security that people have, they quit looking, right? They stop looking for the truth because they think that they found it. They think that they found that security. And so there's a real danger in that. And so, Jesus warns against that. Paul warns against that. Peter and Jude warn against that with regards to false teachers. And so we got to be careful about who it is that we listen to. In John chapter 10, Jesus says, "My sheep know my voice." We need to know the voice of the shepherd. We need to know as to whether or not it's really coming from Jesus. And how are we going to know that? Do we have something that we can compare people's words to make that distinction? We do, right? God hasn't left us in the dark. He's given us his word. And so we can, like those Bereans, we can search this out to see whether those things are so. We can check it out to make sure that it's correct. So this beast from the earth, he comes up and he speaks like a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. So he's given authority, right? So here's someone who's been given authority or going to be given authority by the Roman government, by the Roman emperor, by the Roman Empire. He's going to be given authority to be in the presence of the Roman emperor and to cause the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. So, what is this? Well, this is false religion. This is the religious aspect, the religious persecution, the religious persecuting power of the Roman Empire that is going around and saying you need to worship the emperor, right? The cult of the emperor, if you will, that you need to burn incense to him and you need to bow down to him. And so that these two beasts are not rivals to one another. They're in league with one another, right? The earth beast is promoting the sea beast. He's promoting the worship of the sea beast. And so he exercises authority, causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. So it's deceptive. Notice that. In verse 14, he deceives those who dwell on the earth. Right? So those that are earthly, those that are worldly people, those that are not Christians, they're going to be deceived by this because he's going to do some things that look magnificent. He's going to do things that look like they're miraculous. But it's a deception, right? Not a true miracle. It's a deception. So this is the idolatrous religion of Rome that's supporting the government of Rome and giving it respectability, giving respectability to this worship of the emperor. And so he causes or makes the earth to worship the first beast. And so there's going to be some force to this, right? And that's the problem with it with regards to the persecution that the Christians are going to have to face is that it's not going to be, well, you can worship the emperor if you want to, right? Or you can go into this building or into this temple and if you want to, or you can burn some incense to the emperor if you want to. There's going to be a force behind it that's going to say, you have to do this, that you must do this. They're going to put a sword to your throat and say that you need to do this or else they're going to kill you. Or maybe they're going to put the sword to your wife's throat and say, you're going to do this or we're going to kill her. And so he's got some power here that's been given to him on earth to be able to try to force people into doing this. Exercises all the authority of the first beast, causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. We talked about that earlier when we looked at the sea beast itself, that it looked like one of its heads had been wounded, but had survived. And when Domitian comes along, there's going to be a group of people, there's going to be a cult, if you will, that believes that this is really Nero who has been reconstituted, right? Uh, I'm losing the word that I want. Reincarnated. Thank you. That's it. Yeah. They think that this is Nero reincarnated, right? Because they thought Nero was crazy. Well, the Domitian is like Nero on steroids. He's even crazier than Nero was. And so when Domitian comes along, there's a group of people that say, "Man, he's like Nero, but 2 steps worse." And so there's an idea here that this is Nero reincarnated. So the idea that he has one head that looks like it's been slain, but it is still alive. That's kind of that idea that Nero wanted to be worshipped, but it was a little more limited. And then Vespasian comes along. Well, he doesn't want any of that. And Titus comes along for 2 years, and he doesn't really want any of that. And then Domitian comes along, and Domitian's like, yeah, we're going to do what Nero wanted, but we're going to make it mandatory, right? We're going to enforce it. We're going to kill people that don't do it. And so it's going to be much worse under Domitian. It says he makes fire come down out of heaven. Don't know exactly what that is. We know that back in the Old Testament that there were prophets of Baal, and Elijah had told them, you pray to your God and you have him consume your sacrifice. You do whatever it is. Maybe he's not listening. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he's sleeping. Maybe you need to shout a little louder, right? And they can't get him to provide fire. And then Elijah has him pour water on his sacrifice, and he calls on God, and God brings fire down out of heaven. And so we know that that was miraculous. This year they're doing something, but it looks like what they're doing is some sort of sleight of hand or some sort of magic trick. It says in verse 13, he performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by the signs. So if it was a real sign, it wouldn't be deceptive, would it? But the fact that he deceives people by what it is that he's doing means that it's some sort of sleight of hand or some sort of magic or some sort of uh, maybe what folks refer to as witchcraft here. But Jesus warned about false prophets. He warned about those that were going to do things like this. Notice with me over in Mark chapter 13. Mark chapter 13 and verse 22. Back up to verse 21. He says, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or look, here he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. That's a scary thought, isn't it? That there are going to be false prophets, there are going to be false people that are going to rise up. They're going to call to say that they are the Messiah, that they are the Christ. There have been cults. There were people who have claimed that they are. I think David Koresh was one of those who claimed in Waco, Texas, that he was the Messiah, right? And so whatever signs they're doing, whatever wonders they're performing, uh, it's not real. And if they're trying to lead you away from God, then that ought to tell you that they're not authentic. Even though they're able to do some sort of magic trick, if they're trying to lead you away from God and they're trying to lead you away from Christ, don't go with them. Don't believe them because they're not authentic. Notice in Second Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 9, Paul here is talking about the man of sin or the man of lawlessness. And he says that when he comes, it says the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders. And so there's going to be false prophets that are going to come. They're going to be able to maybe do some magic tricks. They're going to claim maybe to have done some magic tricks or to claim to have been able to perform some sign or wonder or miracle, but it's deception. I don't know how he did it, but I remember watching on television David Copperfield made the Statue of Liberty disappear. Now, did it really disappear? Was it a miracle? Was it there one minute and then gone the next? It looked that way, but there's a part of my brain that knows that it didn't go anyplace, right? That he didn't really move that statue, that it was some sort of sleight of hand, it was some sort of trick that was done to make it appear that way. And many of the things that Moses did in the presence of Pharaoh, his magicians and his people were able to duplicate. But then when the gnats came or the lice came or whatever it was, they said, we can't duplicate this. This is the finger of God. They recognized the difference between what they could do through sleight of hand and what was a real miracle. And so these things are done and they're going to deceive people. And so we need to be careful that we don't fall into that deception when somebody says that they have performed a miracle and they're trying to lead us astray or trying to lead us into some other way. So we got to be careful of those things. There are religious groups out there today that claim that they've got some sort of relic that perform some sort of miracle, right? Or they've got some sheet that looks like it's got somebody's face on it, and maybe you pull out a potato chip out of the bag, and boy, that looks just like Richard Nixon. That must be a sign, right? Be careful that you don't fall victim to those things. And so this is sort of here as a warning that, yeah, there are going to be some things that are going to look wonderful. They're going to look like they're legitimate, but the emperor is not the one to be worshipped, right? God is. And even within this book, when John sees some of these things and he's told some of these things, at the end, he's going to fall down at the feet of the angel who's showing him these things. And what does the angel say to him? Don't do it. You don't bow down to me. Who do you worship? You worship God, right? Worship God. So not even worshiping angels that are there in heaven with him. Any comments or questions on any of these things? Don't be afraid to ask if you've got a question. I know the book of Revelation, it can be scary, but it was intended for them to be able to understand it and to know what it says and be able to get the message. And there's a message that's here for us too, even though we're not in their shoes, even though it's not written directly to us at the time, there's always application here where we need to be on the lookout for false religion and for deception as well, because we don't want to be taken and led astray by any of that. So it says he deceives those who dwell on the earth, or those that are inhabitants of the earth, right? So those that are going to be deceived by this are people who are not Christians, because they're not going to see the deception that's in it. Their habitation, if you will, is earth. They're earth dwellers. For the Christian, where's our habitation? It's in heaven, right? It's in heaven. So if we're on the right path, if we're following God, if we're in his word and we're seeing what's written there, then we're going to notice those deceptions. We're going to be able to see that better. And the more we know about God's word, and the more we know about Jesus, and the more we know about Christianity, the harder it's going to be for us to be led astray by these things. So we need to be grounded in the truth. And so he's going to deceive them, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived there, at the end of verse 15 or 14. In Revelation 13:15, then he says he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So here again is that authority, that forcing people to worship him. Says that he made an image of the beast, so now they can bow down to him. Now they can burn incense to him. That beast that was wounded by the sword and lived. And so he's given power by Satan, if you will. He's given power by the first beast to be able to do this. He says he's given power to give breath to the image. So it seems to be life in the image and power in that image to take your life if you don't burn incense to it. Some of the pagan temples back in this day would have statues and images of their various gods. And I've talked before about the ridiculousness of idolatry, right? The ridiculousness of worshiping an idol, that you take a block of wood and maybe you chop up half of it and you burn it in your fireplace, and the other half of it you carve an image in it, and then you're going to set that image up and you're going to worship that, and it can't go anywhere unless you take it. It doesn't eat anything, it doesn't speak, it doesn't say anything. Well, here this image seems to be speaking, and it was common in pagan practices that if you wanted the image to look like it was alive, that you would sort of throw your voice, make it sound like it was coming from the statue, make it sound like it was. There's some ventriloquists today that can do amazing things with their voice, and their lips don't move at all. I don't know how they do it. I tried it as a kid. I couldn't, I couldn't get the M, right? The M, you can't not move your lips when you say M, and so you're supposed to use an N instead. But then you end up saying dunny instead of dummy, and it doesn't come out right. But I've seen a ventriloquist who's able to like sing in other people's voices, and his lips don't move. And I don't know how he does it, but I know it's not a miracle, right? And I know it's not breaking the laws of nature, but that he somehow learned how to do that. Well, apparently these folks would do some things that are similar to that. And so don't think that this image is really speaking. Don't think that he's really performing some sort of miracle here, because in all of this, You see that word deceives and deception. There's a deception that's in all of this. That is not true. It's not real, but yet it looks that way to those that dwell on the earth. And so, notice if you don't worship him, if you don't worship the image of the beast, you're going to be killed, right? And there's almost sort of a parallel here, where in the very beginning, right, when God created man from the dust of the earth, what did he do to make him come alive? Breathed into him the breath of life, and man became a living soul, right? Breathed into him, and he gave him life. Here you got this beast that's somehow breathing into this image and is bringing death, right? Because if you follow God, you're going to have life, and if you follow Satan, you're going to have death. You got to choose which of those that you want to have. He's given us the ability to do that. So if you don't bow down to him, you could be killed. So it says in verse 16 and 17, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So he's going to mark those that are his. We saw back in chapter 7 that God was going to mark, or he was going to seal those who were his. And we see that 144,000 there in Revelation chapter 7, that God's going to seal those. He's going to put his mark upon them, that they belong to him, that they are his, right? It denotes his ownership, if you will, by when he marks those that are his. We're going to see the 144,000 again when we get into chapter 14. But he marks those. So what is this? Well, this is a marking of those that belong to Satan, right? That they're going to receive some sort of mark. Now, it could be like, when you go to a club or something, right? Or you go to an amusement park, and when you leave, right, they stamp your hand so that you can get back in, so that they know that, okay, you paid your admission, and so you got that mark so you can come in. It seems here like there's some sort of mark, or maybe they got to be a card carrying member of the emperor cult, right? Or they don't get to buy and sell in the market. Well, back when we looked at what was going to happen with the breaking of the seals, when that second seal or that third seal was broken, there was a black horse that went out, and he had scales in his hand, and it talked about how expensive barley and wheat were going to be, right? That it's going to be much more expensive. Well, for the Christians, they're maybe going to have to exist by buying their food and buying what they need through the black market, and they're going to pay higher prices for that. So there's going to be inflation. There's maybe going to be starvation, because they can't afford to buy what it is that they need to buy, because they're not going to be allowed to buy and sell, because they're not part of the emperor cult. They're not worshiping the emperor. So part of that persecution that's going to take place here is that if you don't have his sign, if you've not been right to his temple and burned incense to him and received, got your card punched or whatever, then you're not going to be able to buy and sell, and so you're going to have a problem with that. So it shows that they're card-carrying members, if you will, of the Emperor Club. And so there's an indication there that you worshiped there. And so if you don't have his name, you're gonna need the black market. You're gonna need those inflated prices. I'll go back and show that to you. It's in Revelation chapter 6. Revelation chapter 6. Verses 5 and 6, it says, when he opened the third seal, I heard the living creature say, come and see. So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. And so there's going to be expense to the prices. Now that could be something that it's going to be a famine, that everybody's going to be affected by that. But certainly here we see that, if you're not part of worshiping the emperor, that you're going to have a harder life for sure. And so it's some means of identification that you belong to the club. Verse 18, he says, here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. So this is talking about the sea beast. It says, but he says, here's wisdom, right? You need to be wise in this. You need to have some understanding in this to calculate that what the number of the beast is. It's the number of a man. So don't think that the sea beast is Satan. It's not. It's a man. Don't think that the sea beast is some sort of mythical creature that's going to arise at the end of time and is actually going to come out of a physical sea and is going to really look like that literally. He's using figurative language for us to understand what it is that he's talking about. Because if these Christians already being persecuted by the Roman Empire are walking around with a book that says the Roman Empire is going to be defeated and you Christians are going to be victorious, they're going to have a lot more problems than they already have. And so this is written in a language and written with signs and symbols that go back to the Old Testament that they would understand, but the Romans wouldn't. And he says, so here's understanding. Understand what this is. Here's the beast is a man, not a demon. He's not Satan, not some sort of mythical creature. And it says his number is 666, and people have gone all over the place with what that means, with what that number represents, or what that, that you can't have maybe a barcode, right? They talk about the barcode being the mark of the beast, and you can't have that. Or you can't have a tattoo. That's the mark of the beast if you have a tattoo. People have gone all over the place with regards to this. Some folks say, well, this is in reference to Nero. Because if you take Nero's name, if you take the letters of Nero's name and you translate the letters into numbers and you add them up, it comes up, and they say that it adds up to 666. It does, but you've got to use the Greek form of Nero's Latin name, and then you have to translate that into Hebrew, and then you have to misspell it. And then it equals 666. So that's probably almost a sure thing, right? We talked about numbers. Sorry, did you have something?
Nature-wise, go back to you know them by their fruit. They would be marked. You would know who was honoring Caesar or worshiping Caesar. You would know who was a Christian by their actions.
Yeah, yeah. You'll know them by their fruit. Yeah.
You're going to know them by what they do.
Yeah. Yeah, the mark that we have, right? The sealing of the Holy Spirit, there's not a physical mark that's on our bodies, right? It's going to say that he's going to put his name on our foreheads. It just means it denotes ownership, really, right? But yeah, we'll know one another by our fruits. But when we talked about numbers at the very beginning of this, numbers in Hebrew were used to represent different things. The number 3 was representational of God. Maybe you think about, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. You think about that number 3 being representational of God. The number 4 is representational of man. You got east, west, north, and south, and the compass. You got the 4 corners of the earth. It's a physical place where man dwells. And so 4 was a number that represented mankind. 7 was a number that represented perfection, right? So 7 was perfect. That's God and man together, right? That's perfection, was the number 7. Well, what is 6? It's imperfect, right? It falls short of it. And so not only does the sea beast fall short, he falls short, he falls short, he falls short. He's a 3-time loser, right? 666. The idea that he's not going to be victorious. He falls short. Even though he looks strong, even though he's been granted authority for 42 months, even though he's been given this time period where he's going to persecute Christians and he looks like no one can make war with him, he's a 3-time loser. And he's not. Yeah. Yeah, the war's already won. Yes, Mark?
Connection with the creation on the fixed day, man was created and given dominion, made in his image, given dominion to. And so ever since then, there never has been one to rule rightly under God except Jesus Christ. And he is not a regular man, he's God man. So this also fits with your point about emphasizing that this is a man that they're talking about.
Yeah.
6 is also connecting to humanity because man made on the 6th.
Yeah, man was made on the 6th day. Any last minute comments, questions, or snide remarks before we break for worship? Thanks for your attention and comments.